They thought she was just another quiet mom, someone who'd never set foot on a battlefield. The Navy SEALs in the room smirked as she stepped onto the mat, hands loose at her sides, no guard up, no stance. The instructor lunged, confident he could take her down in front of everyone. 3 seconds later, he was face down on the floor, arm locked so tight he couldn't move, his rubber knife skidding across the gym. The laughter was gone. The smirks disappeared, and at the back of the room a decorated SEAL commander stood to his feet and saluted her. They'd just learned the hard way. You never underestimate Ren Calder. This is veteran biker. Comment 1 if you're new, 2 if you've been with us, 3 if you ride with us every week. Like, subscribe, and stay to the end. The gymnasium of Venridge Sports Academy was alive with an almost theatrical energy, the kind that hummed in the air on special occasions. Rows of folding chairs faced a wide expanse of gleaming hardwood floor, polished so perfectly that the light from the overhead panels scattered in thin silver streaks. Banners in bold reds and deep blues hung from the rafters, each proclaiming the Academy's values: discipline, perseverance, excellence, in block letters that seemed to watch the crowd as much as inspire them. The muffled thuds of practice bags being struck somewhere in the back alternated with bursts of laughter and applause from parents and students gathering for the school's annual open day. It was a day designed to impress. Coaches in crisp tracksuits, students in spotless white GIs, and proud families filling the bleachers. People stood in small clusters, swapping stories about recent tournaments and future goals. The conversations a collage of ambition and parental pride. Children darted between rows, their belts knotted tightly, their bare feet slapping against the wooden floor before they were corralled back by a gentle but firm hand. In the highest row of the bleachers, tucked away in a seat that offered both a perfect view of the mats and the comfort of distance, sat Ren Calder. To the casual observer, she blended seamlessly into the mix of parents, mid-40s, dressed in a plain khaki jacket that had seen better days, faded jeans, and a pair of sneakers so worn they had molded to the shape of her feet. Her hair was pulled back in a low, no-nonsense knot, and the minimalism of her appearance was the kind that drew no second glance. Her posture was relaxed enough to look at ease, but it was the kind of relaxation that could evaporate in an instant. Her eyes, dark and steady, swept over the gym without settling too long on any one thing, taking in every entrance, every shadow, every person whose gaze lingered too long where it didn't belong. She didn't tap her foot or fidget with her hands. She simply observed, quietly, efficiently, the way some people breathe without thinking. To anyone else, this was a celebration, an afternoon in the harmless bubble of suburban community life. To Ren, it was an exercise in staying unseen. She was here for one reason: Evan, and she intended to remain just another face in the crowd for as long as possible. Down on the mats, Evan was among a line of teenagers warming up for the demonstrations scheduled for later in the program. His GI was freshly laundered, the fabric still stiff, and his belt was tied in a neat, square knot that spoke of meticulous repetition. At 15, he was tall for his age, the lines of his shoulders hinting at the man he was growing into. His dark hair refused to lie flat, no matter how many times he tried to comb it before they left the house, and a faint crease sat between his brows as he went through his stretches. He moved with a controlled precision that was part discipline, part self-consciousness. The knowledge that his mother was somewhere in the bleachers, watching, made his motions just a touch sharper, a touch less fluid, as though he were constantly aware of being graded. Evan wasn't embarrassed of her exactly, but there was a deep teenage instinct to separate the worlds of home and school. To him, she was the mom who reminded him to clean his room and double-checked his homework. The idea of her being part of this world, where skill and rank were visible and measurable, felt like a clash of realities he'd rather avoid. On the far side of the mats, Master Aaron Reeves was pacing with the easy confidence of a man entirely at home in the spotlight. Broad-shouldered, trim, and impeccably groomed, he wore the Academy's black and gold Instructor's GI with the air of someone who had earned the right to be recognized. His voice carried easily across the gym, even without the small microphone clipped to his lapel, and he had a performer's sense for rhythm, pausing just long enough to let a statement land before moving on. The whispers about Reeves were part of the Academy's lore. He was said to have trained several Navy SEALs in hand-to-hand combat, a fact he neither confirmed nor denied outright, but which he let hang in the air like a tantalizing possibility. Today he was speaking about the value of discipline, how the habits formed in training could shape a person for life. His words were smooth, his gestures practiced. Wren's gaze swept over him briefly, assessing. She didn't linger. He was just another instructor in a long line of people who thought confidence was the same as capability. Her focus drifted back to Evan, noting the precision of his stances, the way his eyes tracked Reeves's demonstrations with unblinking attention. The demonstration began in earnest, students pairing off to show basic sequences of blocks, counters, and takedowns. There was a rhythm to it, the kind that was as much performance as it was training. Snap, step, strike, pivot. Each sequence ended with a bow, the sound of bare feet sliding on the polished floor, a soft counterpoint to the applause. Then Reeves shifted the energy. "We've seen what our students can do," he said, his voice bright with anticipation. "Now let's see how these techniques hold up against someone with a little real-world experience. I need a volunteer from the audience." A ripple of amusement ran through the crowd. Some parents laughed, some shook their heads, and others immediately looked down at their phones or watches, avoiding eye contact. No one wanted to be the one dragged onto the mat opposite a man like Reeves. Wren's shoulders eased back a fraction. This wasn't her moment. She could sit quietly, let the awkward silence drag until someone else, maybe one of the younger assistant coaches, stepped up. But then a voice rang out from the middle rows, cheerful and oblivious. "Wren used to serve!" Her jaw tightened before she even turned to see the source. Carol, bright, chatty, and famously unable to keep a secret for longer than it took to tell it, was waving toward her with one hand and nudging the person beside her with the other. Wren forced a small, polite smile and shook her head slightly, hoping the gesture would be enough to deflect. "Oh, that was a long time ago," she said, her voice carrying just far enough to be heard but soft enough to sound dismissive. Reeves's head turned toward her like a radar, locking onto a signal. "A veteran?" His grin broadened. "Perfect. Ma'am, we'd be honored to have you join us." The polite murmur of encouragement from the crowd began almost immediately, swelling in volume as people nudged each other and turned to watch her reaction. Every eye in the room seemed to be on her. Evan had frozen mid-step on the mat, his expression a silent plea. "Don't, Mom. Please don't." Wren took a slow breath. The simplest way out would be to refuse outright, but that would keep the spotlight on her longer than necessary, and worse, humiliate Evan in front of his peers. She couldn't do that to him. So she stood, every motion deliberate, and began the slow walk down the bleachers. The crowd parted for her, some smiling in encouragement, others lifting their phones already recording. Reeves stepped forward to greet her, offering a rubber training knife with an almost ceremonial flourish. "Just hold this for me," he said, the formality in his tone edged with the faintest condescension. "I'll take another. We'll go slow." She took the knife without comment, her grip loose, the blade angled slightly down. The mat under her feet was warm from the previous demonstrations, the faint scent of disinfectant rising from its surface. She faced Reeves, her body still, hands at her sides, no guard, no stance. He smiled at the crowd as much as at her. "I'll be the aggressor. You just try to fend me off. Simple, right?" The audience chuckled, leaning forward. Wren's eyes stayed on him, calm and unreadable. The khaki jacket, The worn jeans, the unremarkable sneakers, everything about her said civilian, but beneath the stillness her mind was already mapping the angles, the distances, the timing. Reeves moved first, a smooth, confident lunge, the kind meant to overwhelm before the opponent could react. The knife came in low, his weight shifting forward to drive her off balance. 3 seconds later, the blade was on the floor. Reeves was face down on the mat, his arm locked at an angle that made movement impossible without pain. The sound in the gym died instantly, replaced by a stunned, absolute silence. Wren released him and stepped back, the hold vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. She didn't smile or bow. She simply turned toward the edge of the mat, her expression unchanged. Somewhere in the back of the bleachers, Samuel Rourke rose to his feet. He was broad-shouldered, his close-cropped hair silver at the temples, his gaze locked on her with an intensity that cut through the distance. His right hand came up in a crisp, precise salute, a gesture that, to those who understood it, spoke louder than applause. Wren met his eyes for a fraction of a second, then she stepped off the mat, blending back into the crowd as though nothing had happened. Wren's return to the bleachers was a study in controlled anonymity. The path between the rows closed in behind her as if the crowd had never moved, the faces she passed still frozen in that peculiar mixture of disbelief and curiosity. She slipped into a seat without ceremony, her khaki jacket creasing under her folded arms. On the mats, Reeves was back on his feet, rubbing his shoulder with a kind of smile that tried to reframe the entire encounter as part of the plan. The microphone in his hand crackled faintly. "That," he said, voice pitched higher than before, "is why you never underestimate an opponent." He was aiming for gracious, but Wren could hear the tightness under the words. She didn't glance at him. Her eyes were on Evan. He was still standing where she'd last seen him, GI rumpled from movement, face carefully blank. When their gazes met, it was only for a heartbeat. His eyes slid away, and he turned toward his classmates, dropping into a ready stance as though nothing had happened. The remainder of the demonstration blurred past her, forms and drills, polite applause, the low murmur of parents commenting to one another. The heavy air of expectation that had descended during her moment on the mat never fully lifted. Every so often, she felt the prickling heat of someone's eyes on her, students whispering, parents sneaking glances, phones angled for a covert photo. By the time the program wrapped, her body ached with the effort of staying still. As families began gathering their things, she stayed seated, letting the bulk of the crowd flow toward the exits. Moving too soon would mean questions, handshakes, someone asking for a repeat performance. "Wren!" Carol's voice cut through the general din like a chime she'd rather not hear. She rose before Carol could cross the bleachers. "Need to catch Evan before he heads to the locker room," she said, offering the excuse with a small wave and a smile that brokered no follow-up. Downstairs, the air was warmer, heavier, with the mingled scents of sweat, fabric cleaner, and the faint tang of floor polish. Evan emerged from the locker room with his duffel slung over one shoulder, gaze fixed somewhere over her left shoulder. "Ready?" she asked. He shrugged, brushing past her toward the exit. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted the asphalt in long gold stripes between the parked cars. She matched his pace, letting the silence stand between them until they reached the car. Only once they were on the road did he speak. "You didn't have to do that." Her hand stayed steady on the wheel. "It would have been worse if I'd refused." He didn't argue, but the way he slouched against the passenger door told her the conversation wasn't over. They drove the rest of the way home without words, the quiet thick with the weight of questions unasked. Their neighborhood was a grid of narrow streets lined with small, tidy houses. Wren eased into the driveway, noting the blinds half drawn in the front window. Habit, not paranoia, but a habit she never broke. Inside, the air was cool, the living room's neutral palette unchanged since the day she'd moved in. Evan headed straight upstairs, his footsteps fading as he closed his bedroom door. Wren stood in the kitchen for a long moment, her fingers resting lightly on the counter. The afternoon had been a crack in the armor she'd spent years reinforcing, not a fracture, not yet, but enough to let the air in, enough to be dangerous. She was still standing there when the phone in her jacket buzzed. Unknown number. Called her. The voice on the other end was gravel wrapped in steel. "Didn't think I'd be calling you on a day like this." Her gaze flicked to the window automatically, scanning the quiet street. "Rourke, you made an impression today." He didn't say how he knew. Men like Rourke didn't need to. "That video is going to move fast, and you know who watches for things like that." The image of him in the bleachers, that salute cutting through the noise, flashed in her mind. "I'll manage it. That's not how this works." His tone was flat. "Corvin's in the state, 2 cities over." He's been quiet for a long time. And quiet for men like him doesn't mean gone. If that clip gets in front of the wrong eyes, it won't. You can't guarantee that. A pause just long enough to press the point. "I've got a friend monitoring traffic. If your name comes up, I'll know. Until then, keep your head down." The line clicked dead before she could respond. She slid the phone onto the counter and stood still, listening. The house was silent except for the faint creak of settling wood. Outside, a car rolled by, its tires whispering over the asphalt. Upstairs, a door closed. Dinner was quiet. Evan picked at his food, asked nothing, offered nothing. Afterward, he retreated to his room again. Wren stayed at the table, the cooling cup of tea in her hands, more an excuse to sit still than anything else. Night came on slowly, the last bands of light fading from the living room walls. She moved through her routine, locking doors, checking windows, without conscious thought. By the time she turned in, the house was sealed, the alarm set. Sleep was shallow, brittle. In the early hours, a noise pulled her half awake. A car engine somewhere nearby, then silence. She stayed still, counting her breaths, until the quiet settled again. Morning broke clear and bright, the kind of day that would have felt harmless once. She made coffee, checked the headlines without really reading them, and stood at the window with her mug cooling in her hand. Evan came down late, his hair still damp from the shower. "You driving me? I've got errands after." The ride to the academy was uneventful, but her eyes flicked to the mirrors more often than usual. At the final turn into the parking lot, she noticed them. 2 men standing near the far edge, not talking, not moving, like parents waiting for a child. Jeans, nondescript jackets, both with phones in hand but not looking at the screens. She parked without hurrying, tracking them in the corner of her vision. Evan was halfway out of the car before she spoke. Straight inside. "Don't stop." He glanced at her, puzzled, but obeyed. Wren stepped out, slinging her bag over one shoulder, and crossed the lot at a diagonal that would bring her within arm's reach of the men. She let her phone rest loosely in her hand, thumb hovering over the camera icon. "Excuse me," she said, her tone light, just a little flustered. "I'm new here. Could you point me toward the main office?" One of them looked up, meeting her eyes for only a fraction before flicking his gaze toward the building. "Over there." As he pointed, her thumb moved. The shutter click was silent, the photo already saving before she thanked them and turned away. She walked the rest of the distance to the doors without looking back. Inside, she ducked into a side hallway, opened the messaging app, and attached the image to a single word text, confirmed, sent to Rourke. By the time she stepped back into the lobby, the 2 men were gone. The rest of the morning passed in a haze. She stayed through the first half of Evan's session, then left without telling him. On the drive home, she replayed the encounter in her mind. The stance of the taller one, the way the other kept scanning the lot, the slight bulge under the jacket that could have been a phone or something else. Her phone buzzed once as she turned onto a street. Rourke again. "Good photo. I'll run them." She didn't ask for details. If he had them, he'd share. If he didn't, there was nothing to be done but wait. That evening, Evan came down for dinner with a question in his eyes. She deflected, steering the conversation to safe topics. It didn't hold. You know those guys from this morning? She kept her tone even. No, they looked, I don't know, wrong. Her fork paused over her plate. What makes you say that? They weren't watching the door, they were watching me. It was the first time he'd said it out loud. The awareness that something outside his world had shifted. They won't bother you, she said. He didn't press, but the set of his jaw told her he knew she wasn't giving him the whole truth. That night after he'd gone to bed, she sat at the kitchen table with the lights low, the photo of the two men open on her phone. Every line of their faces was sharp, clear, evidence, a warning. She sent a copy to a secure cloud folder, then deleted it from her gallery. The house was silent, but she felt the weight of movement beyond its walls. Not yet close, but closer than before. By the time she turned off the light, she'd already made the decision. The window for staying invisible was closing. And once it closed, there would be no opening it again. Wren woke before dawn, the grey light seeping through the blinds, painting thin stripes across the ceiling. Sleep had been restless, short bursts of uneasy dreaming cut by long stretches of staring at the dark, listening for sounds that didn't belong. She sat up, the sheet falling away, and listened. The house was still. Upstairs, Evan's room was quiet. She moved to the kitchen, the coffee maker gurgling to life under her hand. The bitter scent filled the air, grounding her. She needed to think, to strip away the noise and see the problem as it was. Two unknown men, professional posture, targeting Evan with their eyes. Corvin's name in the air for the first time in years. Rourke's warning wasn't hypothetical anymore. Her phone buzzed against the counter. A text from Rourke, no matches in open databases. Faces flagged for deeper check. Assume hostile. She stared at the words for a moment, then turned the phone face down. Assume hostile. That had been the default for most of her former life, a lens she'd tried to set aside when she built this one. But that lens was back now, snapping into place over everything she saw. By 7, Evan was at the table, his hair still damp from the shower, backpack slung over one shoulder. "You're quiet," he said. "I've been up for a while. You're always up for a while." The edge in his voice wasn't anger so much as awareness. He was watching her as closely as she watched him, looking for cracks. She didn't give him any. "I'm dropping you at school today. No academy after." "Why?" "Because I said so." She kept her tone neutral. He looked like he wanted to push, but the set of her shoulders told him it wouldn't matter. The school drop-off was uneventful. Wren stayed until she saw him disappear inside, then pulled away, her eyes flicking to the mirrors. She didn't drive home. Instead, she took a series of back roads, doubling back twice, scanning for tails. Nothing obvious, but obvious wasn't how people like Corvin worked. She ended up on the outskirts of town, where the streets gave way to open ground and low industrial buildings. She parked beside a long-abandoned warehouse, the corrugated siding rusted through in places, weeds pushing through the asphalt. From the trunk she pulled a hard plastic case, the kind that could pass for old tools to anyone who didn't know better. Inside, nested in foam, were fragments of her old life, a compact surveillance kit, a set of lockpicks, a burner phone still in its shrink wrap. The burner was for Rourke. She didn't want any more sensitive conversations on her personal line. She set it up in the driver's seat, the hum of the connection as she dialed, grounding her in the routine. He answered on the first ring. "Go ahead. They're local now," she said, "or close enough. Yesterday was a probe. They wanted to see how I'd react. And you gave them nothing? They got a smile and a thank you. Photos already burned from my end. You have the only copy. Good. I've got a partial hit on one of them. Balkan Network. Freelance, but they've worked protection for Corvin before." The name landed between them like a weight. "Then he knows," she said. "If he didn't before, he does now. We need to move you. I'm not running blind. If he's this close, he's already mapped the obvious routes. I take Evan out there without a plan. We're more exposed than if we stay put. You've got somewhere in mind, I do. There was a pause on the line. "You think it's still intact?" "I left it intact." "Then move. Don't wait for me to tell you twice." She ended the call, stowed the kit, and drove home by a different route. Evan was back by mid-afternoon, the slam of the front door announcing his arrival. He dropped his backpack by the couch and hovered in the doorway of the kitchen. "We're going somewhere, aren't we?" "Yes." "Because of those guys?" She met his gaze. "Because it's time to be somewhere else for a while." He hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." They packed light, clothes, basic supplies, nothing that couldn't be left behind without regret. Wren moved through the house with practiced efficiency, checking drawers, making sure nothing identifiable would be left in plain sight. When the bags were ready, she locked the front door and didn't look back. The drive out of town was deliberately unremarkable. She kept to secondary roads, bypassed the highway, and maintained a steady speed. Evan didn't ask questions, but she could feel his eyes on her in the quiet stretches. As the suburbs thinned into countryside, the landscape grew rougher, dotted with the skeletons of old industrial sites and the remains of disused service roads. By late afternoon, they reached the perimeter fence of a long-forgotten military training facility. The chain link was rusted, the warning signs faded to illegibility. Wren turned down a narrow dirt track that paralleled the fence for half a mile before cutting toward a section hidden by overgrown trees. She stopped the car, got out, and walked to a spot where the fence sagged just enough. The padlock on the access gate was still there, but the marks on its shackle told her no one had touched it since she had. From her pocket, she produced a small pick, worked it into the lock, and felt the pins give way one by one. The gate swung inward with a slow groan. Inside, the air was cooler, stiller, the sounds of the outside world muffled. Concrete buildings sat in silent rows, their paint flaking, windows dark. Evan followed close as she led him through a warren of covered walkways to a squat, windowless structure half buried in the earth. The door was steel, scarred with age. She worked the second lock, the heavy bolt sliding back with a sound that echoed in the narrow entryway. The interior smelled faintly of dust and machine oil. Narrow corridors led deeper underground, the walls lined with faded safety placards. She took him to a room near the center. No windows, reinforced walls, a generator in the corner. "This will do," she said. Evan dropped his bag on one of the bunks and looked around. "It's creepy. It's safe." She set to work immediately, checking the generator, replacing the old fuel with the reserve she kept in the storage room. The hum of the engine filled the space, lights flickering to life overhead. They spent the evening settling in. She made a simple meal from the supplies she'd brought. Evan ate quietly, still absorbing the change in their surroundings, when he finally asked, "How long will we be here?" She didn't answer directly. "Until it's safe to be somewhere else." He seemed to accept that, or at least decided not to push further. Later, when he was asleep, Wren sat at the metal table in the main room, the burner phone open in front of her. She composed a short message to Rourke. "In. Secure for now." The reply came minutes later. "Good. Eyes open. He won't wait long." Wren closed the phone, the weight of the words settling in. He wouldn't wait long, and when he came, she'd have to be ready, not just to survive, but to end this on her terms. The first night in the bunker passed in restless fragments. The hum of the generator was a steady presence in the background, a sound that should have been comforting but only reminded Wren of how deep underground they were. She had been in places like this before, temporary command posts, forward operating bases, but never with someone she was responsible for in the same way she was for Evan. She woke twice in the dark, the old instincts forcing her upright at the smallest change in ambient noise. The first was nothing more than the metal creak of the building settling under the weight of the earth above. The second was the faintest vibration, as though something heavy had passed over the ground far above them. She didn't move toward the door. There was nothing to be done about what she couldn't see. She lay back down and stayed awake until the strip lights clicked on automatically with the morning timer. Evan emerged from his bunk looking as though he'd barely slept either. He didn't complain. That, more than anything, told her how unsettled he was. Over breakfast, instant oatmeal, hot tea, he kept glancing toward the door as though half expecting it to swing open. She gave him jobs to do. Keeping him busy would help with the waiting. He inventoried the canned food and bottled water, checked the medical kit, and helped her clear a narrow corridor that had partially collapsed under fallen debris. It was a simple task, but she could see it grounding him. By midday, the bunker felt less like a hiding place and more like a base of operations. The lighting was stable, the generator steady, and their supplies neatly arranged in the storage alcove. Still, the air was heavy with anticipation. Wren spent the afternoon in the control room, a small space with a metal desk, a bank of dusty monitors, and a rack of outdated communications gear. Most of it was useless now, but the hard-wired CCTV network was still intact. She powered it up, each camera feed flickering to life in shades of grey. The exterior view was limited to a few fixed angles, the main gate, the overgrown road leading in, and two blind corners along the outer wall. She adjusted the chair and watched. Hours passed. The only movement came from the wind stirring the weeds at the fence line. It was early evening when the first real sign appeared, a flicker of motion at the farthest camera, too far for detail, just a shadow crossing the road. Wren leaned closer, adjusting the gain. The shape resolved into a man on foot, moving with the measured pace of someone who knew he was being watched. He never looked directly at the camera, but the angle of his head told her he knew exactly where it was. She tracked him until he disappeared into the trees beyond the fence. He hadn't tried to get in. Not yet. Evan was in the common room when she found him. "We might have company soon," she said. His eyes widened. "Here? Possibly. You're going to stay inside no matter what. If I tell you to move, you go to the inner room and you don't open that door until I come for you." He nodded, the tension in his shoulders betraying the fear he was trying to hide. That night, Wren didn't sleep at all. She sat in the control room, eyes on the monitors, the burner phone beside her. Midnight came and went. The feeds stayed empty. It was just before dawn when the phone buzzed. A text from Rourke, Corvan in area, spotted with two men. "He's not here for reconnaissance." She typed back, understood. By mid-morning, she had a plan. The bunker had always been defensible, but it could be more than that. She pulled an old canvas roll from the storage room and spread it across the metal table, hand-drawn schematics of the facility, marked with faded pencil notes from her last time here. She walked the perimeter twice, moving quietly over cracked concrete and through knee-high weeds. The air smelled of rust and dry earth. She noted where the walls still stood solid and where they had crumbled, where the vegetation offered cover and where the sight lines were clean. Back inside, she laid out the traps. Nothing elaborate. Tripwires for noise alerts, broken glass in shadowed corners, two makeshift spike strips across the narrow approach to the main gate. All of it designed to slow someone down, to break their rhythm, to give her seconds she could turn into an advantage. Evan watched her work without interrupting. At one point he asked, "Do you think they'll actually come here?" "Yes." The simplicity of the answer made him swallow whatever follow-up question he'd had. By late afternoon, the outer ring was set. Wren returned to the control room and scanned the feeds again. This time, when motion flickered on the far camera, she was ready. A black SUV rolled into view, slow, deliberate. It stopped just short of the gate. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark civilian clothes. Even through the grainy feed, Wren recognized the shape of his face, one of the men from the academy parking lot. He walked to the gate and stood there for a long moment, looking through the chain link toward the heart of the facility. Then he smiled, a small knowing curve of the mouth, before turning back to the vehicle. The SUV reversed slowly down the road and out of view. Wren exhaled through her nose. This was a message. They knew exactly where she was. She spent the evening moving Evan's sleeping area to the innermost room, the one with the heaviest door. She showed him how to bar it from the inside, how to turn the generator off from within. "If I tell you to go in here," she said, "you lock it, you turn off the lights, and you don't open it for anyone but me, no matter what you hear." He nodded, his jaw tight. "And you?" "I'll be fine." They ate in silence, both listening to the faint hum of the generator. Outside, the wind had died, leaving the air unnervingly still. It was close to midnight when the sound came, low, rolling, impossible to mistake for anything but engines. Wren was on her feet instantly, moving to the control room. Headlights flared on the far camera, sweeping across the fence line. 2 vehicles this time, both black, both without plates. They stopped at the same point as before, engines idling. Wren picked up the burner phone and sent a single word to Rourke, "Contact." On the screen, the passenger doors opened. 3 men stepped out, all dressed in dark clothes, their movements quick and coordinated. They approached the gate, one of them producing a bolt cutter. The lock snapped in 2 bites. The chain fell away. Wren switched to the next camera in the sequence, tracking their progress as they slipped inside. The first tripwire sang a high metallic note as it broke. The men paused, scanned the ground, then moved on. Slower now. She left the control room and moved to her first position, a shadowed alcove near the main corridor. The concrete was cool under her palms as she crouched, the air heavy with the scent of dust and metal. The first man to round the corner was the one she recognized from the SUV. He moved cautiously, scanning the space, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. Wren let him pass. The second followed close behind, his attention fixed ahead. When the third stepped into view, she moved. One arm around his neck, the other locking his right arm, dragging him back into the dark before he could make a sound. A quick application of pressure and his body went limp. She lowered him silently to the floor. The other 2 hadn't noticed. They were already deeper in the corridor. Wren ghosted after them, her steps silent on the concrete. The second man slowed as he reached a junction, peering down both halls. Wren closed the distance in 2 strides, hooked his ankle, and drove her shoulder into his back. He hit the floor hard. By the time he rolled to face her, she had his own weapon in her hand. A single precise strike put him out. The first man was alone now, and he knew it. His pace quickened, the sound of his boots echoing off the walls. Wren followed, her breathing steady. He reached the main room and stopped, scanning for movement. The moment he turned toward the far door, she stepped into his blind spot. One hand twisted the weapon from his grip, the other drove into his shoulder, spinning him off balance. He hit the wall, rebounded, and found himself staring down the length of his own rifle. Wren didn't speak. She motioned toward the corridor with a flick of the barrel. He hesitated, then complied, moving ahead of her toward the outer door. When they reached it, she disarmed the weapon entirely, tossing the magazine into the weeds outside, before sending him out into the night with nothing but the sound of the bolt sliding home behind him. Back inside, she secured the unconscious men with zip ties from the supply closet. They'd wake eventually, but by then she and Evan would be deeper inside the facility, in positions they wouldn't expect. The message was clear. They had found her, and this was only the opening move. Wren sat in the control room, watching the empty road beyond the gate. The night was still again, but the silence felt temporary, fragile. She knew what came next would be louder. By morning, the bunker had the stale air of a place that had seen a fight and was holding its breath for the next one. The 2 unconscious men were still zip-tied in the storage corridor. Wren had dragged them there after checking they carried no trackers. Only knives, suppressed pistols, and the kind of cheap comm pieces you didn't keep after a mission. Whoever had sent them didn't care if they came back. Evan stayed in the inner room. He hadn't argued when she told him to. The look in his eyes last night had shifted from fear to something harder, awareness that this was no longer a maybe. It was happening. Wren spent the early hours reinforcing the second perimeter inside the facility. She dragged a heavy metal workbench across one hallway and braced it with broken shelving. She rigged another tripwire in the stairwell, this one attached to a set of old gas canisters that would topple and create enough noise to mask her movement. Every barrier was a layer, not to stop them entirely, but to make them lose seconds. Seconds mattered. The burner phone vibrated just before 8. Rourke, he's moving. Satellite picked 3 vehicles. ETA under an hour. He'll be with them, Wren replied with a single letter R. She didn't waste time thinking about what would happen if this went wrong. There was no room for it. By the time the first crunch of tires on gravel reached her ears, she was in position at the main corridor, rifle braced, breathing slow. The external cameras showed the convoy pulling up, 2 SUVs and a covered pickup. The first men out weren't amateurs. Tactical clothing, body armor under loose shirts, suppressed weapons slung low. They fanned out without speaking, and then he stepped out. Corvin. He hadn't changed much in the years since she'd last seen him. Still tall, still with that predatory ease in his movements. His hair had gone to steel grey at the temples, but it only sharpened the impression that he had survived more than he should have. He carried no visible weapon. He didn't need to. His presence was the weapon. Corvin didn't look at the cameras, but she knew he was aware of everyone. He walked to the open gate, stepped through, and stood in the center of the cracked concrete courtyard. His men spread in a loose circle behind him. His voice carried, calm and cold. Wren Hargrave, I'm not here for a chase, I'm here for an ending. She didn't answer. Her reply was the first tripwire snapping. The sound was followed by the metallic crash of the canisters in the stairwell. The men flinched, scanning for the source. Corvin only smiled slightly and gestured. They entered. Wren moved to the secondary corridor and waited. 2 of them rounded the corner first, weapons high. She fired twice, center mass. Both dropped without a sound. She stepped over their bodies and fell back before the others could close in. The noise drew them, exactly as she wanted. They split, half down the right corridor toward the generator room, the others pushing toward the storage wing. Corvin stayed in the middle, listening, head tilted like he could read the building's intentions. She could feel the hunt tightening. Every shot was a signal, every movement a trail. She took the upper-level stairs 2 at a time, moved through the narrow gallery overlooking the main floor. From here, she saw 2 men approaching the inner door, the one Evan was behind. Her heartbeat slowed. The first man reached for the handle. A single shot through the railing dropped him. The second spun, searching for her in the shadows above, and caught her second round before he could fire. Still protecting strays, Corvin's voice floated up, almost conversational. You haven't changed. Wren stayed silent. She knew better than to let him pace her emotionally. He moved into the open floor, looking up toward the gallery. His hands were empty, but his stance was coiled. Come down, Wren. Let's talk about the boy. That told her enough. He didn't just want her gone, he wanted leverage. She slipped away from the gallery, dropping down a side ladder to the machine shop level. The smell of oil and rust filled the narrow space. She could hear his footsteps now, unhurried, following. The shop had only one entrance. She positioned herself behind the far workbench, rifle aimed. Corvin stepped in alone. He didn't flinch at the sight of the weapon. You think I came all this way to get shot in a doorway? You came all this way because you can't stand that I walked away, she said. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You walked away from me, from us, and you think hiding in a hole with a kid makes you free? She kept her aim steady. Freedom's not what you think it is. For a moment, neither moved. The hum of the generator was the only sound. Then, without warning, he lunged, not for her, but for the heavy steel lever on the wall. She recognized it an instant too late. the manual lock for the bunker's main blast doors. He yanked it down, and the deep grinding sound of metal on metal filled the air. The exits were sealing. Wren fired, but he was already rolling behind a support column. The shot sparked off the metal. He came up with a pistol in hand now, firing 3 quick rounds that forced her to duck. She moved low, flanking him around the column. He anticipated, meeting her with a kick that drove her back into the bench. The impact jarred her shoulder, but she held onto the rifle. He pressed fast, close quarters. His strikes were efficient, aimed to disable. She blocked, countered, felt the old rhythm of combat settle into her muscles, but he was strong, and the confined space gave him the advantage. A sudden burst of static crackled from the radio on his belt. A voice, "We've got the boy!" "Inner room!" Wren's blood went cold. That had been his real play all along. She drove an elbow into his ribs, hard enough to make him stagger, and broke for the doorway. His hand closed on her jacket, but she twisted free, sprinting for the inner corridor. 2 of his men were dragging Evan out, his hands bound, eyes wide. Wren didn't slow. 3 precise shots dropped both before they could even turn their weapons on her. She caught Evan's arm and pulled him behind her. Corvin's voice echoed from the machine shop, not shouting, "Just certain, you can't keep him. You know I'll come again." Wren didn't answer. She was already moving Evan toward the service tunnel, a narrow, half-collapsed passage she'd cleared days earlier as a last resort. Behind them, the sound of boots on concrete was closing in. They slipped into the tunnel, the air damp and cold. The overhead bulbs flickered weakly. The path angled upward toward a rusted hatch that led into the scrubland 1/2 mile from the gate. Wren shoved it open, the daylight hitting them like a shock. The wind was sharp, carrying the smell of rain. She pushed Evan through first, then climbed after him, closing the hatch as quietly as possible. They crouched in the tall grass, listening. No pursuit yet. Corvin would find the tunnel entrance soon enough, but by then they'd be moving. Wren put a hand on Evan's shoulder. "We go east. Keep low. No stopping until we're over the ridge." He nodded, his breathing fast but controlled. As they started toward the distant line of trees, a single gunshot cracked behind them. Not close, but deliberate. A message. Wren didn't look back. She didn't need to see him to know Corvin was standing at that hatch, watching them go. The ridge dropped steeply into a valley scattered with weathered pines. Wren and Evan moved in bursts, short sprints, then stillness, using every fold of terrain to stay out of sight. The morning clouds had thickened, muting the light and swallowing sound. By the time they reached the far tree line, Wren's shoulder throbbed from the impact in the machine shop, but she ignored it. They had maybe 30 minutes before Corvin's men would sweep this area. She led Evan toward a collapsed fire tower she'd noticed on recon weeks ago. From a distance, it was just another ruin. Up close, it was a fortress in miniature. Rusted steel frame, reinforced base, narrow ladder to a single platform. They climbed, the metal groaning under their weight. From the top she could see the bunker's access road, a thin scar through the hills, and the flicker of movement. SUVs moving slow, methodical. They were hunting. Wren set up the rifle on the platform edge. "If they push too far, we break east of the river. You don't wait for me. You keep going." Evan's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. The first 2 men entered the valley below. She waited until they were almost under the tower before firing. 2 shots, 2 bodies down. Silence swallowed the echoes. Then came the voice, not from below but from the tree line opposite. "You've improved your perch work." Corvin stepped into view, alone, hands empty. The wind tugged at his jacket, revealing the pistol at his hip. "Let him go," Wren said. "I could, but then what? You keep running, I keep finding you. We've done this dance for years." He looked at Evan. "You think she's your savior, kid? She's just postponing the inevitable." Wren didn't move from her scope. "You came all this way for me. Let's finish it." A slow smile curved his mouth. Finally. He didn't go for the gun. He walked straight toward the tower, forcing her to choose, shoot him in cold blood or face him. She chose. Wren slung the rifle and descended fast. Her boots hit the dirt as he closed the last few meters. No circling, no talk this time, just the impact of bodies. His first strike grazed her ribs. Her counter caught his jaw. They moved with the economy of fighters who knew there was no round two. Corvin drove her back against the tower's steel leg, trying to pin her arm. She slammed her forehead into his, broke free, swept his leg. He rolled, came up with the pistol, but her boot caught his wrist. The weapon skittered into the grass. They hit the ground together, grappling for position. He was stronger, she was faster. Her knee drove into his side, and she wrenched his arm until his breath hissed through clenched teeth. "This ends now," she said. His eyes locked on hers. No fear, just recognition. It was never about ending. It was about proving. She didn't answer. The hold tightened. Bone gave with a muffled crack. He gasped, the fight draining from him. Wren stood, breathing hard, and kicked the pistol farther away. Evan was at her side now, eyes wide. She looked down at Corvin. "Stay down, or next time you don't get up." For the first time, he didn't smile. They left him there, walking east until the valley dipped, and the river's cold shimmer appeared ahead. The current would mask their trail. By nightfall they would be gone from this county entirely. On the ridge behind them, Corvin lay still, one arm bent at an impossible angle, watching the space where they had disappeared. The river was colder than Wren remembered. Mountain meltwater bit through fabric and skin, numbing her legs within seconds. She kept Evan close, their packs held high as they waded, letting the current erase their footprints from the gravel bar. They emerged on the far bank, hidden under a low canopy of alder and cedar. Evan was shivering but silent, his eyes fixed on her face for cues. She gave him a small nod. They still had ground to cover. An old logging trail snaked deeper into the forest. Wren set a steady pace, listening for anything out of place, the snap of a branch, the shift of wind that could mask pursuit. Nothing yet. But she knew Corvin's type. Injury would only slow him, not stop him. He would regroup. By mid-afternoon, the trail spilled into a forgotten ranger station, its walls weathered silver, windows boarded from decades of neglect. Inside, dust motes drifted in weak sunlight, and the air carried the faint, dry smell of old paper. Wren barred the door with a rusted metal pole, then moved room to room, checking corners. She found a working stove in the back and a half-burned stack of cedar logs. Within minutes, heat began to push back the chill. Evan sat on the floor, rubbing his hands. "We staying here?" "Just for tonight," she said. "Then we move east, toward the highway. Rourke can meet us there." At the mention of the name, Evan's shoulders loosened. He trusted the older man instinctively, even without knowing their full history. Wren unrolled a faded topographic map from a drawer. The nearest highway crossing was 20 miles away. A long trek, but doable if they moved early. She traced a route along the ridgelines, avoiding open ground. As she worked, a faint buzz broke the quiet. She froze, eyes narrowing. It wasn't a phone. Too irregular. The noise came again, clearer now, the whir of small rotors. She pushed Evan toward the inner room. "Stay down! Don't move until I call." Through a gap in the boarded window, she saw it. A quadcopter drone drifting above the treetops, camera gimbal swiveling. Recon, not attack. Which meant someone was close enough to watch the feed. Wren dropped to the floor, moved fast to the back door, and slipped outside. The drone was holding position, maybe 100 yards out. She picked up a rock, waited for the wind to shift, and hurled it. The stone struck one rotor arm. The drone wobbled, overcompensated, then spun into the branches with a brittle crack. The forest went still again, but only for a heartbeat. Then, from the east, came the sound she'd been expecting, 2 engines, moving slow on the far ridge. She ducked back inside. "We're leaving now." They took the north side of the trail, moving through tangled undergrowth. The station was out of sight when the first shouts rang out. Whoever it was had found the drone wreck. By the time the voices faded, the forest had swallowed them. Hours later, they broke from the trees into a clearing where an abandoned ski lift loomed like a skeleton against the sky. Wren stopped at the base of the lift tower. "We'll camp here. High ground, clear lines of sight." They climbed to the midway platform. From here, she could see the valley spread out below, the thin ribbon of highway just visible on the horizon. Night came with a slow burn of stars. Evan slept curled in his jacket, exhaustion finally pulling him under. Wren stayed awake, rifle across her knees, eyes scanning the dark. Near midnight, a flicker of movement caught her eye, a single figure stepping into the clearing far below. Too far to identify, but the posture was unmistakable, upright, deliberate, scanning the tree line like a predator. Corvin. Even at this distance, she could tell his left arm was bound tight against his body, but he was still moving, still hunting. Wren lowered the scope. She could take the shot, end it here. But Evan stirred in his sleep, and her finger eased from the trigger. Ending him now might buy time, but it wouldn't erase the danger entirely. Corvin's network would keep coming. She let him disappear into the shadows of the tree line. Then she turned back toward the horizon, counting the hours until first light. By dawn, they would be on the move again. This wasn't over. She knew that. But they were still ahead, and as long as that held, there was a way out. First light seeped into the forest in slow, cold increments. Mist clung to the pines, veiling the valley below in shifting grey. Wren nudged Evan awake, her voice low. "On your feet. We've got one shot to make the highway before they close the net." They descended from the ski lift platform and cut northeast through heavy undergrowth. Wren kept them off established trails, zigzagging between ridges to break any tracking pattern. Every so often she'd stop, tilt her head and listen, not for the obvious, but for what didn't belong. 3 miles in, she found it, a line of fresh boot prints cutting across a dry creek bed. Heavy treads spaced wide apart, not Corvin's stride. Too many men. She gestured for Evan to kneel. Patrol, maybe 4, maybe 6. They're sweeping west. Evan's eyes darted toward the sound of distant voices. "We can go around?" Wren nodded. "Wide loop. Stay close." They moved uphill, gaining elevation until the ground tilted sharply underfoot. The ridge offered a panoramic view of the next valley, and there, parked half-hidden under camo netting, was a black SUV with its driver standing outside, scanning the horizon with binoculars. Wren crouched behind a fallen cedar. "That's their relay point. We get past it, we've got open ground to the highway." Evan's breathing quickened. "What if they see us?" "They won't." She scanned the slope for cover, mapping each dash in her head. "On my mark, we move." They broke from cover in short bursts, using boulders and clusters of scrub pine for concealment. The driver didn't glance their way, his attention fixed on the western approach, expecting pursuit from that direction. 20 minutes later, they'd cleared the last rise, and the faint rumble of distant traffic reached their ears. Evan allowed himself a thin smile. "We made—" A shot cracked through the morning air, splintering bark inches from his head. "Down!" Wren shoved him into a shallow depression as another shot rang out. The angle was wrong for the SUV driver. This was from the tree line behind them. She didn't need the scope to know. Only one man tracked her like that. Corvin emerged from the mist, one arm still bound, the other holding a compact carbine. His face was pale, but his eyes were locked, unblinking. "Keep moving," Wren whispered to Evan. "Stay low, head for the highway, don't stop. What about go?" She rose, firing 2 rounds toward Corvin, forcing him behind a trunk. Evan bolted, disappearing into the brush. Corvin stepped out again, advancing in measured strides. You never could just walk away, Vale. Neither could you, she replied, circling left to draw him off Evan's trail. Their gunfire traded like a metronome, her shots forcing him into cover, his forcing her to keep moving. The terrain funneled them toward a rock outcrop, a natural arena with nowhere to vanish. She reached it first, taking position behind a jagged slab. Corvin's footsteps crunched closer, then stopped. Silence pressed in. When he spoke, his voice was almost conversational. You could have joined me. We could have run everything from the shadows. Ren's reply was steady. You're confusing power with purpose. A rustle to her right, he was flanking. She swung wide, catching him mid-step. Her round grazed his thigh. His return fire tore through her jacket sleeve. They closed the gap fast, the fight collapsing into brutal close quarters. His carbine clattered to the ground as her forearm slammed into his weapon arm. He countered with a hook to her ribs, driving her back against stone. Pain flashed white, but she twisted, hooking his injured arm and dragging him off balance. They hit the ground, rolling in a tangle of grit and breath and locked muscles. He got a knee into her side, forcing a grunt from her lungs. Still think you can walk away? Ren shifted her weight suddenly, letting him overcommit. His momentum rolled them, giving her the high position. One sharp elbow strike and his head cracked against rock. For a second he went slack. She seized the opening, drawing her sidearm and pressing the muzzle to his sternum. His eyes opened, clear and defiant. Do it? She hesitated. Not from mercy, but from calculation. Killing him would end him, yes, but it would also ignite whatever network he still controlled. Dead men could be martyrs, broken ones couldn't lead. She stepped back, gun still trained on him. You'll live with this. That's worse. She kicked his carbine into the ravine, then turned and ran, using the ridge to mask her retreat. Minutes later she caught sight of Evan near the tree line where asphalt gleamed beyond. A battered pickup was parked on the shoulder, and leaning against it was Rourke, scanning the woods with binoculars. Evan sprinted ahead, collapsing into the older man's arms. Ren emerged seconds later, slowing only when she reached the truck. Rourke's gaze took in the torn jacket, the dirt and blood. You left him breathing. She nodded. For now, he didn't argue. Get in. We're not stopping until we're 3 states over. As the truck pulled away, Ren watched the tree line recede in the side mirror. Somewhere back there, Corvin was dragging himself upright, recalculating. This wasn't finished, not entirely, but for the first time in a long while, the board was hers to play. And that, she thought, was enough. The highway unwound before them in long, empty stretches, the morning sun breaking through low clouds. Ren sat in the passenger seat, her eyes scanning the rearview mirror every few minutes, more from habit than fear. Rourke drove with both hands on the wheel, his focus steady. Evan was wedged in the back seat, head resting against the window, drifting in and out of an exhausted doze. They didn't speak for the first hour. The silence wasn't awkward, it was necessary. Each of them carried their own weight, and words couldn't lighten it. Finally, Rourke broke it. You've bought us time. But you know he's not done. Ren's gaze didn't leave the horizon. I know, Corvin's not the type to fade quietly, but he's hurt. And his people saw him lose. Rourke's jaw tightened. Sometimes that just makes a man more dangerous. A mile marker flashed past. Ren reached into her jacket, pulling out a folded piece of paper, creased, weather-stained. She slid it across to Rourke. He glanced at it, eyes narrowing. Coordinates, safe house, off the grid, no records. You get Evan there, he disappears until I say otherwise. You're not coming? Ren shook her head. I'm going to finish it. If Corvin wants me, I'll make sure I'm the only thing he finds. Rourke didn't argue right away. He knew her well enough to understand that her mind was already set. This is the last run, Vale. After this, you burn the whole trail. She gave a faint, humorless smile. That's the plan. By midday, they pulled into a small service town, the kind with one gas station and a diner that doubled as a post office. Rourke filled the tank while Evans stayed inside, eyes fixed on the counter's display of postcards. Wren stepped out into the sunlight, feeling the weight of the day settle across her shoulders. Somewhere out there, Corvin would be licking his wounds and calling in favours. The clock was already ticking. Rourke finished fueling, closing the cap with a firm twist. "You've got an hour before we roll. Whatever you need to set in motion, do it now." She walked 3 blocks to a payphone tucked between a laundromat and an antique shop. The receiver was cold against her ear. She dialed from memory, each number a relic from another life. A voice answered on the 3rd ring. "Phoenix, it's Vale. I need a ghost pass. 1 day's duration." A pause. "You're going to him." "Yes," Static hissed faintly. "If you're not out by dawn, I won't be calling." She hung up without waiting for a reply. Back at the truck, Rourke didn't ask what she'd done. He just handed her a black duffel bag. "In case you need to remind him why you were the best." The road split an hour later. Rourke turned west toward the safe house. Wren took the duffel and started east on foot, her figure shrinking in the side mirror until the curve of the road swallowed her. The approach to Corvin's temporary base was deliberate. She'd mapped it in her head the moment she'd seen his patterns. He favored elevated positions, multiple escape routes, and a clear kill zone in front. By late afternoon, she was in position, crouched behind a ridge overlooking the compound. 3 prefab structures, a generator shed, 2 vehicles parked at angles for quick departure. Through her scope, she spotted him on the deck of the main building, arms still bound, talking to a man with a headset. Even from here, she could read the tension in his posture. Anger, frustration, maybe a flicker of doubt. Wren adjusted her aim, not for a kill shot, but for precision. The round took out the radio on the railing in a shower of sparks. Both men dove for cover. Her voice carried across the gap, cold and unshaken. "You wanted me. I'm here." The next minutes unfolded like a chess match played with live ammunition. Corvin's men fanned out, trying to flank her position, but each movement was anticipated, countered, shut down before it could close in. Finally, Corvin stepped into the open, weapon lowered. "You came to finish it?" Wren rose from cover, closing the distance slowly, each step measured. "I came to make sure you understand something." They stopped 10 feet apart. The wind tugged at loose strands of her hair, the silence between them thick. "You can chase me," she said, "but you'll never own me. And if you keep coming, I'll dismantle everything you've built, piece by piece, until you're alone in a room you can't get out of." His smirk was thin, but his eyes didn't waver. "You think you scare me? I don't have to," she said. "Fear's a luxury. All I need is certainty." She stepped back, tossing a small device onto the ground between them. A green light blinked twice, then began a steady pulse. Corvin glanced down, reading the implication instantly. "You'd level this place? It's not the place I'm after." She turned and walked away. He didn't follow. He didn't call her bluff either. By the time she reached the rendezvous point at the edge of the next county, night had settled in, the air carrying the smell of rain. Rourke's truck rolled up from the dark, Evan leaning out the window. "You're back," the boy said, relief breaking across his face. "For now," she answered, sliding into the passenger seat. They drove in silence for a few miles before Rourke spoke. "So?" Wren looked out at the wet asphalt flashing under the headlights. "He knows where the line is now. Let's see if he's smart enough not to cross it." The truck kept rolling, carrying them away from the fight for now, and somewhere far behind, in a compound gone dark, a man nursed his wounds and replayed a single truth over and over. He'd had her in his sights, and still she'd walked away. The road was empty now. Just a ribbon of blacktop disappearing into the horizon, carrying 3 people away from a storm that had raged far too long. The hum of the engine was steady, but beneath it there was something else, a silence that wasn't heavy, but full, a silence that meant survival. Wren Vale sat in the passenger seat, her eyes on the distance. the world sliding by in a blur of shadow and light. Somewhere far behind them, the man who had hunted her nursed his defeat, his ego shattered, his grip on control slipping like sand through his fingers. He would remember her, not for the fight they'd had, but for the way she'd walked away, alive, unbroken, untouchable. For Evan, the boy whose life had been reduced to hiding and running, the journey ahead was finally open. He leaned forward from the back seat now and then, glancing at her, not quite smiling, but with a different look, one that hadn't been there before. Trust. Rourke's hand stayed on the wheel, his gaze fixed forward. He'd seen enough in the last few days to know there are battles you win with firepower, and others you win by standing your ground until the enemy sees themselves reflected in your resolve. Wren had shown him both. They didn't talk about what came next. That was for tomorrow. Tonight was about the miles between them and the past. But if you'd been in that truck, if you'd seen the way the streetlights cut across Wren's face in fragments of gold and shadow, you'd know she wasn't just a survivor. She was a line in the sand. And maybe that's what this was always about. Not revenge, not glory. Just the quiet, unshakable promise that some lines can't be crossed without consequences. The world will never know what happened out there. There won't be headlines, no commendations, no medals. The people who matter most, the ones she fought for, will live their lives thinking it was luck or fate that kept them safe. They'll never know the cost, but we do. We've seen what it looks like when someone refuses to break, when they turn their back on the easy road and walk straight into the fire, not because they have to, but because no one else will. Wren Vale didn't just beat Corvin, she dismantled the myth of his control. She showed his followers that their leader could bleed, could be outmaneuvered, could lose. And in the world he came from, that's more dangerous than any bullet. Rourke knows the fight isn't over. Corvin's the kind of man who doesn't forget. But now, neither does she. And that's the balance that will keep both of them alive until one of them decides the end is worth the cost. For Evan, there's a future again. A safe house. A chance to grow up without always looking over his shoulder. Maybe one day he'll understand what it took to buy that chance. Maybe he never will. That's fine. Some debts aren't meant to be repaid, just honored. As the truck disappears into the dark, the rain begins to fall in thin silver lines across the road, erasing the tire tracks they've left behind. By morning, there will be no trace they were ever here. But legends don't live in the dirt or the sky. They live in the moments like this, quiet, fleeting, unforgettable to the few who saw them. This is why we tell these stories, because somewhere out there, another fight is waiting, another line will be drawn, and someone will step forward just as she did, without hesitation, without a thought for the odds. And when that day comes, maybe you'll remember Wren Vale, not for the battles she fought, but for the way she stood her ground when it mattered most. Now I want to know, if it were you in that place in that moment, would you walk away or would you make your stand? Tell me in the comments below. Like this video if you believe courage isn't about the fight you start, but the one you refuse to lose. Subscribe to Veteran Biker for more stories like this one, stories of people you've never heard of, doing things the world will never forget. Because not every hero wears a uniform, not every battle makes the news, and not every legend dies when the fight is over. Some of them are still out there, watching, waiting, ready. This was Veteran Biker. Stay safe out there. And remember, sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one you'll never see coming.